Welcome to ABA Beyond the Data. I'm your host, Jay Burton, BCBA, and more importantly, the proud parent of two amazing boys who just happen to be on the autism spectrum. This podcast is designed especially for BCBAs and other behavior professionals who are looking for continuing education credits, and it is dedicated to providing practical solutions to practicing clinicians. As we all know, ABA isn't just graphs, data sheets, and acronyms. It's about real people, real families, and the real lives of the clients we work with. The perspectives you will hear in this podcast come not only from my years of clinical practice, but also from living this journey of being a parent with children on the spectrum. What you'll hear in this podcast is going to be coming from the latest research on the topics we cover, my personal professional reflections, and most importantly, a parent perspective that few working in this field can offer, with the hope of providing more practical strategies that you can apply to your own practice. Each episode, I hope to cover a topic that is important to those working in the field of ABA, and especially those working in pediatric autism intervention, and provide both professional and parent perspectives that will hopefully grow your practice. And today we're starting with one of the most important and sadly misunderstood concepts in ABA, that's assent. We're going to be looking at common questions that I've heard in this field, such as what does it really mean for a learner to agree to the intervention? Why does it matter ethically, practically, and humanely to be using assent? And how do we actually honor assent in real sessions without feeling like we're negotiating with tiny union reps in bluey pajamas? I mean, I think that's the big one, right? Is how do we actually get it into session? I also know there are a lot of BCBAs out there who are still holding out from jumping on board the assent-based practice bandwagon, if you will, and I get it. I was one of those BCBAs. For many of us, this isn't what we were taught, and it flies in the face of what we know. It's a hard pill to swallow. It's also a personal challenge. It forces us to face a cold reality and admit that maybe the way we've been practicing wasn't always the best for the kids that we were working with. And the goal here isn't to make anyone feel guilty. I'll be honest, and I think this is important. I was a holdout for way too long. I was the old school, follow through no matter what BCBA. Even after my first son's diagnosis, I didn't change. I brought that rigid follow through approach home with me, and I had this terrible mentality that I was going to fix my son. And it's one of my biggest regrets from as being a parent and as being a practitioner. I saw firsthand how it impacted my relationship with my son, and eventually I had to admit I can't keep doing this. I remember so clearly how differently he responded to me versus his mother. With her, there was warmth, comfort, and connection. With me, it was like a soldier snapping into compliance. And for the longest time, and I'm ashamed to admit this, I thought that was something to be proud of, that I had more instructional control. But when my son was sick and needed comfort, who did he turn to? Not me. He wanted nothing to do with me then. He wanted her. And those moments hit hard. When I began finally shifting to assent-based practices and applying it in my home, it wasn't easy. There were dynamics to repair, behaviors that resurfaced, and a lot of guilt because my son was used to me always forcing follow through. And that guilt grew when I realized these were the same kinds of recommendations I had been giving to families for years. And now, when I look at my younger son, who has only ever known a dad practicing assent-based care, I see such a different relationship. There's trust, there's balance, there's less work to repair because I'm not undoing the damage of following direction dynamic. I am building a relationship every day. And I want to be really honest here, this isn't easy for me to share. But if we don't start opening up about the mistakes of our field and our personal mistakes as practitioners and even as parents, how is anything going to ever change? Boy, we are starting on a heavy topic. I'm not sure if this is a podcast or my own personal therapy session right now, but it's the first podcast episode of this new show. And I do want to address this subject head on because it's so relevant to what our field is going through right now. And honestly, it's so relevant to what I personally have been going through the last few years as I worked through getting on board with Assent based practices. And I hope that this journey and me opening up about this journey that I've had will also bring on a few more BCBAs onto the bandwagon. Now, before we dive any deeper into the topic today, let's make sure you all understand how to get CEUs because, yes, you do have the option to get CEUs for listening to this podcast. It is a give and take. It is not just about me going through a therapy session right now and you all listening. There is an opportunity to earn CEUs. It's pretty simple. You must listen to the entirety of this podcast, obviously. Throughout the podcast, I have randomly put 3 key words that will be used when purchasing your CEU. These key words are the keys to accessing your continuing education units and fulfills the board's requirements to show that you are actually listening. Well, with that, let's get in the heart of today's topic and let's start off by answering the question of what exactly is assent. Well, let's begin with a word that we all should have learned in grad school, and if not, it's just an everyday word, and it's cousin of assent. It's consent. In ABA, consent is a legal, informed acknowledgement that you have been informed of the interventions that will be utilized and that you agree to the implementation. It's what you or I sign when we go in for a medical procedure or when parents sign off on treatment plans. Consent means you understand what's going to happen, you've been informed of the risks and benefits, and you say, yes, let's do this. But here's the obvious challenge with consent, especially for us. Many of our learners, children, individuals with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, aren't legally able to give that kind of consent or may lack the communication skills to truly understand or provide consent. And yet, they're still the ones experiencing the intervention, right? That's where assent comes in. Assent is the learner's active agreement to participate. Even if they can't legally sign the document, it's their yes in whatever form they're capable of giving. And here's the critical part. Assent is not passive. Silence is not assent. Just because a learner isn't objecting doesn't mean they're agreeing. True assent requires an affirmative signal as a yes with words, gestures, or behaviors. And equally important, assent can be withdrawn at any time. In plain terms, that means the learner can change their mind and revoke their participation. If they once said yes, but later they push away the materials, turn their bodies, or even say no, that's dissent. And our ethical job is to recognize it and respect it. Okay, guys, we're going to pause here for just a second. The first key word is dissent, spelt DISSENT. Dissent. And dissent doesn't always come in the form of words. Sometimes it's more subtle. And as practitioners, we have to be sharp enough to pick it up. A learner folding their arms, sliding down their chair, walking away from the table, or hiding under the table with their stolen reinforcement. Those are all forms of dissent. That's them saying, no thanks. Even if they don't have the words to say it, that's them communicating, I do not consent, I dissent to this. So let's recap. Consent equals legal and informed agreement. Assent equals learner's affirmative yes, either through behavior or through body language or a literal yes. Silence does not equal assent, and dissent or withdrawal from assent can happen at any time, and it must be respected, guys. And that sets us up perfectly for the next big question. If assent is real and it's not just about compliance, why does it matter so much in ABA? Why does it matter? If you've been in the field for a while, you've probably noticed that assent isn't always talked about in the same manner as data collection, reinforcement schedules, or functional analysis. And yet, it's arguably more important than all of those, because if a learner isn't willing to participate, what we're doing isn't really teaching, it's compliance training at best, and at worst, it's coercion. And let's start with the official stuff, because I know my audience here, BCBAs, supervisors, folks who live and die by the ethics code. Wink, wink, hopefully, right? Y'all are some ethical folks out there, right? Well, either way, the BACB's ethic code for behavior analysts, revised 2020, makes it clear. We are required to involve clients and relevant stakeholders throughout the service relationship and obtain assent when applicable. That little phrase, when applicable. Sometimes it gets used as a loophole. But here's the thing. If we take our code seriously, it applies a lot more often than some people want to admit. And we are going to circle back to when it is applicable, but let's be clear. That applicable is being played way too fast and loose right now. And let's be real for a moment. This isn't about the ethics code or legal paperwork or requirements. It's about our client's dignity. It's about giving learners the same respect you or I would expect if someone were trying to teach us. Imagine walking into a workplace training and the trainer says, "We're going to spend the next hour practicing how to alphabetize filing cabinets." You say, no thanks. And they respond by physically guiding you to the cabinet, forcing your hand onto the drawer handle, and saying, "Don't worry, you'll get reinforced after 10 correct responses." You'd be furious. You would lose your blankety mind. And yet, that's what is happening when we ignore dissent in ABA sessions. And it's not just our ethics code. Let's zoom out. Beyond our ethics code, there's also the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is global level stuff, guys. The CRPD, as it is known, makes it clear all people, regardless of age, gender, diagnosis, or ability, have the right to autonomy, choices, and freedom of expression. Article 7 and 21 talk about children with disabilities specifically having the right to express their views freely and emphasizes the right to communicate what works best for them. So when we ignore assent, we're not just bending our ethics code. We're violating globally agreed upon basic human rights, guys. And I get it. This is some heavy stuff, guys. But I want you to understand the scope of the importance of assent. But let's cool it down a bit and pull back to the therapy room, because all this United Nations convention stuff can feel a little abstract when you're sitting across from a 6-year-old who just crawled under the table with a bag of goldfish crackers. So here's the reality. Ignoring assent destroys trust. And trust is the currency of therapy. Without it, you've got nothing. And honestly, all of this kind of triggered a story for me. One of my sons used to have this uncanny radar for when real work is about to happen. they could pull out a game, a toy, or an iPad, and he would be engaged and smiling right there with them. But the moment he saw Central Reach open, the sacred app, he vanished. And I'm talking Houdini level disappearance, guys. The RBT would look down at their iPad for like a second and he would legit be gone across the hallway, hiding under a table, typically somehow with a bag of snacks that definitely did not belong to him. True story. Don't know how that guy used to move so fast. To this day, he still moves like a jackrabbit. I swear the kid can be in two places at the same time. Now, if you're writing up that session in an old school ABA style, you might have documented that as noncompliance or escape maintain behavior, but here's the truth. That wasn't just behavior to reduce. That was communication. That was dissent. That was him saying, this doesn't feel good to me. I don't want to do this right now. That's a 1-star Yelp review, guys. Would not recommend. Think about it. If a restaurant serves you cold food and you walk out, that's feedback. If my kid runs from your therapy session the minute the materials hit the table, that's feedback too. It's their way of saying, this isn't working for me. And it's our job to not punish that feedback. It's to listen to it, analyze it, and adjust our practice. Here's where it gets sticky though. Some people worry, if we honor dissent, won't the learners just avoid everything? Won't they never work? That fear is rooted in the idea that learners only participate if we force them to. But think about your own life. Do you go to the gym because somebody is dragging you by the arm there? Hopefully not, right? You go because you see value, because you've built routine, and because maybe you get to listen to your favorite podcast while you're on the treadmill. But it's the same for our learners. They want to learn because they've built routine, because they see value in it, and because they get to participate in fun activities. Therapy without assent is basically restraint. And I know that's heavy to hear. You can call it teaching, you can even call it behavior change, but if the learner isn't there willingly, you're not shaping skills. You're shaping compliance under coercion. And history shows us that coercive practices don't just fail to produce durable learning, they actually harm relationships and lead to trauma. On the flip side, honoring assent builds trust. When learners know they can say no and it will be respected, they're more likely to say yes in the future. Participation becomes voluntary, not forced. That voluntary participation is where the magic happens. That's when you get genuine engagement, quicker skill acquisition, and a relationship that actually matters. Now, let's talk about practicalities. What does ignoring assent look like in everyday ABA? It looks like pulling a child back into their seat after they've walked away. It looks like hand over hand prompting when the learner is crying and resisting. It looks like presenting the same task 10 times even though the learner has pushed it away 9 times. And what about honoring assent? What does that look like? It looks like pausing and asking, what are you trying to tell me right now? It looks like offering choices. Do you want to do blocks or puzzles first? It looks like teaching functional ways to dissent. If you need a break, here's a card you can touch. And let's be honest here. If you've ever worked with kids, and especially kids on the spectrum, you know that dissent is going to happen, whether you want it to or not. The only question is whether you're going to frame it as defiance or as communication. So why does dissent matter? because it's the difference between therapy being something done to the learner and therapy being something done with the learner. And that shift is everything. Let me put it this way. Data sheets and graphs will tell you whether a skill was mastered, but Assent will tell you whether a learner felt respected while mastering it. And if we're not measuring that, then we're missing the point, guys. So as we think about Assent, I want you to reflect on your own practices. The next time a learner says no, verbally, behaviorally, or silently under the table with a Pop-Tart, pause. Don't see it as opposition. See it as feedback, because that's exactly what it is. Feedback is the foundation for how we respond when Assent is withdrawn. But before we get there, let's sit with this question. If Assent is real, and it's not just compliance, what does it look like in practice to actually honor it? So let's move into it. How do we respond to Assent withdrawal? This is the part that is going to make some practitioners squirm. We've talked about what Assent is, and we've talked about why it matters. So now let's talk about what we actually do when a learner says no. Because let's be honest, dissent happens. Learners walk away, they fold their arms, they cry, or sometimes just straight up yell no. And here's the fear I hear all the time. If I honor dissent, aren't I just letting the learner escape all the demands? And sometimes the answer is yes, that's exactly what you're doing, because participation must be voluntary. If it's not voluntary, it's not Assent. And if it's not Assent, it's not ethical ABA. Now, before you panic, this doesn't mean learners never engage in difficult tasks. It doesn't mean we throw structure out the window. What it does mean is that we acknowledge dissent as valid communication and we respond thoughtfully, not coercively. When I was looking through the research for Assent-based practices, there was 3 extremely easy practices that I saw in several of the articles that I found. One, many of us that were Assent-based were already doing, but it was nice to see it validated in actual research and actual articles. And the first one of those 3 was you simply don't represent the demand that you've placed that led to the dissent. You respect the no. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Don't push it. If the learner clearly says no, verbally or otherwise, you respect that. You don't represent the task during that session. It's simple as that. For example, let's say you pull out fine motor task that involves threading beads. The learner pushes the material away, turns their body, and says, all done. At that point, the ethical move is to honor the withdrawal of Assent. Maybe beads just don't happen today. That's okay. Now, this doesn't mean we give up forever. It means we respect the no in that moment. Forcing participation when a learner has withdrawn Assent destroys trust. It's like telling a colleague, you don't get to say in whether this meeting happens. I'm dragging you in whether you like it or not. You might get them in the room, but you won't get their buy-in. And trust me, the learner knows the difference. When you show them that no is respected, they're more likely to say yes in the future. But a key point to this, and a little bit of caveat to what the research says, is that you are not simply coming back the next day to do exactly the same thing. You should be analyzing, probing, and assessing what went wrong and what triggered the no. This may mean doing preference assessment, asking the RBTs if any other situations have arisen recently that may have caused aversiveness to this specific situation, or a dozen other things that might need to be reassessed to determine where that no came from. And this strategy works best for situations in which it is a affirmative no from the child. Whether that means a literal vocalization that no, they do not want to engage in this activity, or they're showing some clear behavioral signs that this is adversive. This is especially useful when you need more time to reassess and figure out what to do next. Or if the client needs more time before another presentation, potentially because of its aversiveness. It's also going to be really useful for your RBTs that might not have the experience that the next two options that I'm going to lay out require for it to be implemented properly. And so if you got a green RBT that is on your staff and they get the dissent no, it is better for them to just honor it than to try to follow through. That way you can come back, provide feedback, and do the reassess that they need the support in. The second strategy being represent it later, because sometimes it's all about timing. So in these specific situations, the problem isn't the task itself, it's the timing, it's the environment, or it's the learner's internal state. Maybe the learner is hungry. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he's overstimulated. Maybe he just came from Costco. I mean, I literally feel so overstimulated when that's happening. Or maybe he's just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, right? In those cases, you can represent the task at a later time. But here's the important piece. Representing doesn't mean you come in and sneak it to them, right? You can't just slide the materials back in front of the learner like nothing happened. They already dissented once to this. So instead, you check back in. You reoffer the task, maybe in a gentler way, maybe paired with a choice, maybe in a different room. You look for an affirmative sign of assent before you proceed. Let me give you an example. A learner walks away from the table during the morning puzzle time. Instead of forcing them back, you prompt a functional escape statement, such as, I'm all done. And then you let them engage in a different activity for a bit. Later in the session, you run a preference assessment to see what the child is most motivated to work for. And after you have identified that, you say, perfect, let's play puzzle. And then we can get whatever the item is. You show them the puzzle and watch their response. And if they lean in, smile, and say yes, great, you're back in business. If they turn away, you've got your answer. Back to the drawing board. This isn't caving. This is respecting the learner's timing and recognizing that assent isn't static. It can change throughout a session. And yes, it is more challenging and requires us to constantly be trying new ways to get a learner's buy-in. But we're not statically maintaining what session looks like if we are not seeing improvement, right? If things are not improving, we should be changing the way we are intervening. So when is the best time to use this option? I would say it's likely best with like moderate precursor behavior showing, or those slight indicators of not wanting to engage. Unlike option one, which is best for when the stimulus itself is becoming aversive, this one's best for situations where the context around the stimulus, whether or not it's their own well-being or the environment that they're in, is the issue that's causing it. So coming back at a later time is an easier option, of course, with a reassessing. For example, at my clinic, we run a pod system of different groups of kids all following similar schedules. The schedules rotate on pretty regular bases. And one of those schedules that they follow has a work routine almost first thing in the morning. And oftentimes I have to remind the staff that it's okay if we run a little less demands in this situation or at this specific time. Or potentially the clients just refuse in the morning, and that's okay. So we miss a single table time in the day. Big whoop. And honestly, ask yourself, First thing in the morning, do you really want to be doing the most difficult tasks uh, during that time? Personally, now I need to get through about my first, maybe second, potentially third cup of coffee before I really want to dive into anything complicated like writing a treatment plan. It's the same with our kids, right? Let's give the students we work with the same leeway that we give ourselves, right? Let them come in, get used to that environment, and readjust as we need. Okay, and finally, the last option out there, at least from the options I'm giving you tonight, is the modify and represent in the moment. So sometimes the learners know isn't about the whole activity, it's about how the activity is presented or specific aspects of the activity. In those cases, you can modify and represent in the moment itself. This might mean simplifying the task, changing the materials, changing the way you're speaking to the client, or embedding something preferred. This method isn't going to work for everybody, as it does require you to think on your feet and go through a whole list of things to figure out what to do in this specific situation with this specific child. All right, so let's jump into a real example. Let's go back to the puzzle situation. So you presented the puzzle to the client and they simply say no while pushing it away from you. Respect that no. And maybe the first thing you do is you remind them of what they're working for. Okay, little Johnny, I hear you. No is the answer. We don't have to do this puzzle. But remember, we're working to watch videos of Bluey. Are you sure you don't want to do the puzzle? All right. And little Johnny still refuses by pushing the puzzle away. Okay, no worries. I might ask, well, okay, Johnny, is there anything else that you want to work for instead of Bluey? And he responds that he wants to work for his goldfish. I say, okay, and I still represent the puzzle, and he still says no. So I go back, okay, Johnny. So it really seems like you don't want to do this puzzle, and I totally get it. It's pretty hard, right? What if instead we do this really cool Bluey insert puzzle over here, and I'll put in the first few pieces? And little Johnny is on board and ready to go. Do you see what's been done there? I used first in language. I've done an informal preference assessment. I've inserted a preferred item into the task. And I've modified the task to make it easier for him to complete. The key is collaboration. You're not tricking the learner into participation. You're showing them that their no has power and you're willing to problem solve with them. This was not a simple cut and dry situation. We used first in language. We ran a preference assessment. We made task modifications and inserted preferred stimuli into the task itself. Obviously, this might be a little bit difficult for many of our BETs that are a little newer to the field, which seems to be more and more of them every day. So it's going to take some time, some training for them to build up this skill. But once they are able to modify the skill and to modify the task that they're doing and reassess the situation in the moment, they're going to be able to keep this in their back pocket and they're going to be able to run things so much smoother, all while making sure that they're maintaining Assent. But it really does take a huge shift in mindset. And you have to move that mindset to, yes, I can compromise. And so many staff in our field, including myself at one point, are just completely unwilling to make that compromise with these children. I think it's important to remember that these are children we're working with, right? No matter their diagnosis, no matter the environment they were raised in, kids are not going to just be compliant little robots all the time, right? So, this shift in mentality is hugely important because compromise is a huge aspect of this third and final option. But I swear, once you're able to modify in the moment, reassess in the moment, oh man, things just fly so much more smoothly. And there's this story that I I would like to share with y'all that I think captures this um, situation perfectly. My son Lucas was about to head out the door for ABA one morning. Part of our routine was putting on his shoes before leaving. Normally, this was no problem. I would say, okay, buddy, let's get your shoes on, and he'd go along with it. But one day, I said the same thing, and clear as day, he looked at me and said, no. Now, here's why this is such a big deal. No was one of Lucas's earliest words. And as a parent, hearing your child use their voice to assert themselves for the very first time, it was huge. I was ecstatic. So you better believe it, I honored it. That boy went to ABA that morning shoeless. And I didn't have a care in the world. I didn't care what the BCBA or the RBTs were going to think or say. And here's the best part of the story. When we got to the clinic and they asked about his shoes, I told them. He said no. And instead of being annoyed that I didn't follow through, the staff were proud. They celebrated his use of words. They understood that he had learned something far more valuable than putting on his shoes. He had learned the power of communication, and in that moment, trust was built. My child learned that when he used his words, people listened. He didn't need to scream, cry, or melt down. He could just say no, and it mattered. That is assent in action right there. So, what's the takeaway here? When a learner withdraws assent, you've got options. Don't represent demand. Respect the no and move on. Option 2, represent later. Timing matters. Check back in a little later. Make sure you keep it respectful and still respect the dissent. Option 3, modify and represent. Change the condition, problem solve with the learner, reassess, reevaluate in the moment. And whatever you do, document it appropriately. Don't label as non-compliance in your treatment plan. Call it what it is, assent withdrawal. That language matters. It reframes the behavior as communication rather than defiance. And it reminds everyone on the team to respect it. Honestly, I'm probably going to eventually have a whole episode on the word non-compliance and why we need to stop using it. I absolutely hate that word from the bottom of my soul. But we'll get to that another day because that is going to take a whole hour for me to untangle. But seriously, stop using that word. Call it task, refuse it. Call it something else. Please just call it something else. So the next time a learner says no, whether it's with words, gestures, or body language, don't see it as an obstacle to therapy. See it as the therapy, because building the skill of saying no and knowing it will be respected is one of the most important lessons we can ever teach. It's not about letting the learner escape forever. It's about showing them that participation is voluntary, that their voice matters, and that we are partners in this process, not a dictator. Because at the end of the day, the goal of ABA isn't compliance, it's independence, dignity, and choice. And that starts with respecting the no. All right, we're going to pause here just for a second. The second key word is dignity. 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 Okay, so that begs the question, what about our learners that are still developing speech or thus far have not shown progress in the development of vocal communication or any other form of generalized communication systems? That is obviously one of the biggest barriers we run into when we talk about assent. There is this assumption that only learners who can speak can really assent. That if a child can't say yes or no, then assent doesn't apply. But let's be clear, this assumption is wrong, and honestly, it's rooted in ableism. Assent is not limited to vocal communication. Assent is behavior. Assent is communication. A smile, leaning in, reaching for materials. That's assent. Folding arms, turning away, walking off, that's dissent. Dissent. It's our job as clinicians to define and recognize these signals for each learner, not just rely on words. Think about it. You do this every day with the people in your life. When you're talking to a friend, you can tell if they're engaged. They're making eye contact, nodding, maybe even leaning forward. You can also tell if they're not engaged or interested in the topic. They're staring at their phone, zoning out, or giving you that hostage look, right? Like they're trapped in a conversation they didn't sign up for. If you're a BCBA and you don't think that you've gotten this look before, then I would encourage you to work on your ability to read body language, because either you're the most interesting BCBA out there or you're missing something, because we on a regular basis have to drone on about subjects that only other BCBAs are truly interested in, and sometimes I question how many of those BCBAs are even interested in it. So let's make it concrete. For non-vocal learners, assent might look like approaching the therapy space willingly, reaching for materials or engaging with the activity, smiling, laughing, or showing positive affect, staying in close proximity to the therapist without attempts to elope, initiating interactions, whether that's small little ways of, grabbing your hand or just looking at you, or big ways as pulling you along or asking you to come with them. Gesturing you to come with them. On the flip side, dissent for non-vocal learners might look like turning their body away, walking out of the room, ignoring prompts consistently. This is especially true if you know that they've routinely got it before. It might also include pushing materials off the table, covering their face, or withdrawing physically, maybe under the table. And obviously, showing distress behaviors like crying, yelling, self injury, aggression, all of the classic behaviors. Those are all signs of dissent. The key here is to individualize it. Every learner has their own way of saying yes and their own way of saying no. For one learner, assent might be sitting at the table with a relaxed posture. For another, it might be choosing to stay in circle time instead of wandering to the back of the room. The responsibility falls on us as clinicians to define what assent and dissent looks like for each learner. Document it and train our teams to recognize it. It's central to respecting learner dignity. This documentation and recognition of what it is, I cannot understate how important that is. Now let's bring this back to the human side. Think about the last time you were stuck in a conversation you didn't want to be in. Maybe it was a neighbor describing every detail of their lawnmower repairs, or maybe it was a relative at Thanksgiving going on and on about politics. You didn't say no outright, but your body language said it all. You leaned back, you avoided eye contact, maybe even glanced at the door. That was dissent. Our learners do the same thing. And just like you'd hope someone would pick up on those cues, right, to let you out, to let you off the hook, our learners deserve the same courtesy. So here's the reflection I want you to sit with. Are we respecting learner dignity, or are we just pushing through because the session schedule says so? That's the question that separates ethical practice from rote programming, because anyone can run through a checklist of programs. But it takes skilled, compassionate BCBAs to say, this learner is telling me no. Even without words, I'm going to honor that. Because at the end of the day, Assent isn't about the kids we're working with using perfect words. It's about us clinicians paying attention, noticing subtle cues, and respecting the humanity in front of us. All right, so by now I've made a pretty strong case for honoring Assent. You've heard me say it's not optional, it's an ethical obligation, it's about dignity, and it's the right thing to do, right? But let me add some nuance here. There are situations where assent simply can't be the deciding factor. Assent based practices don't mean everything in life becomes optional. Safety, health, and basic dignity override it. If we treated every single task as negotiable, our learners wouldn't just struggle with independence, they'd be at risk. So let's start with safety. If my child is about to dart into the street, I'm not going to pause for a second and say, I wonder if he assents to me grabbing his hand. No, I'm going to stop him. Safety wins. Crossing the street means we must stop and check for cars, whether the learner assents or not. Same thing if they're climbing an unsafe structure, if they're reaching for a hot stove, or running towards traffic. Immediate danger equals assent does not apply. Next up is health and hygiene. If a learner soils their clothing, those clothing need to be changed. It's not optional. Same goes for first aid, medical treatment, or basic hygiene. Here's a real life example. If my kid falls and scrapes his knee, I can't say, well, he didn't assent to a band aid, so I guess we'll let the dirt and gravel sit in there. Of course not. Safety and health wins in those moments. And then there are the daily living necessities. For younger children, especially, there are routines that just aren't up for debate. Brushing teeth, taking a bath, getting dressed for school. If we truly made all of those optionals, we'd be scheduling root canals before the kids were in kindergarten. Okay, and just talking about hygiene and toothbrushing, I have to tell you uh, about this story about my younger son and toothbrushing. Um, if t- if brushing teeth were up to him, we'd be lucky if a toothbrush touched his mouth once a week. There was a stretch where every single attempt was met with cries, refusals, full on meltdowns, and runaways. Now, if we had said, okay, we'll honor your dissent 100% of the time, that kid would have had cavities galore. Sometimes as parents and as practitioners, we have to step in. But here's the lesson. Even though the task wasn't optional, his teeth needed to be brushed, and we still worked hard to make the process less aversive. We introduced different themed toothbrushes. We let him pick the toothpaste flavors. We sang silly songs. We even played Bluey while he was brushing his teeth. And over time, toothbrushing, while still aversive, um, became less and less aversive. So that's the key aspect to this whole thing, right? Is that sometimes we have to follow through no matter what because it's a requirement for daily living for you to function or be safe. And as clinicians, it's our job to do everything in our power to at least try to make them feel happy, relaxed, and engaged. I know that's a very popular word phrasing right now, but it truly is. That is our job to do everything in our power to make these very aversive situations the least aversive as possible and to pair it with things that are positive stimulus, right? So here's the key message to this little section is that not everything is up for negotiation. Safety, health, and basic care are non-negotiable. But, and this is important, even in those non-negotiable contexts, we can still use assent-based practices. We can use, uh, we can offer choices around mandatory tasks. We can let the learner decide when to do the activity. We can add preferred elements to make the experience more tolerable. These strategies don't erase the necessity of the task, but they minimize the coercion and maximize the dignity. It's a balancing act. We don't throw assent out the window when something is required. Instead, we try to do everything in our power to make the experience less aversive. All right, guys, we got another pause here. The third and last keyword is toothbrush, TOOTHBRUSH, toothbrush. As we close today's episode, let's pull everything together with a few key takeaways. First, assent isn't optional. It's not just a nice idea, it's an ethical and humane requirement. Respecting assent honors the dignity of the learner and sets the tone for truly collaborative treatment. Second, remember to define assent and dissent individually for each learner. What looks like a yes for one child may look very different for another. Our job is to pay attention, document it, and train our team to recognize those signals. Third, honor withdrawal. When a learner says no, with words, with actions, or with body language, that's not defiance. That's communication. Respecting withdrawal builds trust and reduces coercion, which ultimately makes therapy more effective. And finally, teach assent as a skill. Saying yes, saying no, making choices, and advocating for oneself. These are not just therapy targets, they are life skills. They're tools for independence and self-determination that go far beyond the therapy room. All right, guys, that wraps up our first podcast, hopefully the first of many to come. Thank you all so much for listening today. If you like what you heard, like and subscribe on the podcast platform that you listen to, be it Apple, Google, or Spotify. I also want to put out credit where credit is due. There were several different articles that heavily influenced today's podcast, but one that was heavily pulled from is Assent and Applied Behavioral Analysis and Positive Behavior Support, Ethical Considerations and Practical Recommendations by Casey A. Bronx and Kristen Smith, which was published in 2023. It was an amazing article. Finally, for all those of you listening for CEUs, here's your reminder to claim credit. Go to aba-ceus.com, where you will enter those 3 key words that you've collected throughout this podcast. Thank you again for joining me today on ABA Beyond the Data. I'm J.L. Burton. See you next.